Steve Fretzin. Welcome to Legally Contented. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. So I'm Steve Fretzin. I'm the owner of Fretzin Inc., focused on helping lawyers to dramatically grow their law practices, have their best year every year. And I'm just so happy to be here. I don't know how much background you want me to give, or you want me to go how far back, or how much introduction, but I'm happy to give whatever you're looking for.
Steve, thanks for taking time to chat with me today. The reason I asked you to join me is because as someone who follows thought leadership marketing and content marketing that law firms do and lawyers do and people in the legal space do, you strike me as being particularly prolific. You've got a number of books out. You have 4 books you've written. You've got a podcast that is out twice a week that you just crossed 300 total episodes. You have a Chicago Daily Law Bulletin column that you've been writing for about 8 years. That's a lot of content. And oh, by the way, you have a day job. You are serving your clients. You are advising lawyers on business development and marketing efforts. So I want to hear about how you managed to be as prolific as you are, given the things you're juggling at once. But before we go there, I want to hear about your background, because you have a fascinating background in terms of where you've been in your career and your business before being a lawyer coach. So can you walk us through a little bit about your background and how you came to be where you are today as a lawyer coach?
Yeah, sure. And if we're going way, way back, I sold shoes at a store called Kinney's, the Great American Shoe Store, back when I was 16, and made my first commissions and thought, wow, this is interesting. I can make more money based on how much I sell, and if I do better than this other store across the street. So I just really enjoyed the interaction with clients and the maturity as a teenager of dealing with adults and families and kids and helping solve problems like what shoes are going to fit and be comfortable. And, hey, I've got a wedding with this color dress and I needed this to be this color shoe. And, we can paint them that color. We did all that kind of stuff. And I went to college literally just to get out of there with a degree so I could go back into sales. And I did that. And I sort of moved up the food chain of sales jobs. And I ended up in franchising through a friend of mine who recognized I had some sales ability and talent. And it was one of the most interesting businesses I'd ever been involved in, because I wasn't just selling businesses. I was actually working to put that person into business. And then I would stay with them and help them sell and help them market and help them. I'd review their profit and loss statement, negotiate a lease. I mean, anything and everything you'd have to do to help a business owner to be successful. And I really liked that part just as much as I enjoyed the selling of a business. And in doing so, I met a coach who worked with me on my sales. I thought I, was doing pretty well, making my, 6 figures plus. And he just really tore me apart as far as like all the things that I was telling him and how I was doing them. And what he said is, you're working way too hard. And I thought that's what you're supposed to do. He goes, you're working way too hard. You need to do better at this, and this, and I can help you. And so I hired this coach, and within 6 months, I had made more money in less time and less effort than I ever had before. And I said to his name is Keith. I go, Keith, how do I do what you do? I think this might be a path for me. And he goes, well, you pay me even a lot more money than you already have, and I'll show you. And so I did. And so, $100,000 later or whatever it was, I'm in my own business and I'm helping primarily entrepreneurs. By the way, Wayne, never batted an eye in the direction of lawyers. Never thought that lawyers needed help with business development. Never thought that was a thing. My father, Larry the lawyer, retired, never having to do any type of marketing, business development, networking, none of it. He's just a smart guy, did it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and that was kind of it. And then the recession hit 2008, 2009, and I just started getting inundated with attorneys that, hours have been slashed, firm got bought, firm went under, GC role ended. They need to now get out there and hustle and do whatever. And it just sort of blew up that it became a thing like, hey, business development is something lawyers actually need to start doing if they're not already. And so after about 16 months, it turned into about 85% of my business was lawyers and law firms. And so it just took off. And, here I was telling them, about how to specialize, and I hadn't pulled the trigger myself. So at some point I said, you know what, I'd rather be a top player and authority in one smaller space like legal than what I had been, which was an authority in 50 industries where nobody knew me except for the local people in my area. So it really was a great fit. The other thing I just add on to that, Wayne, is one of the things I've been teaching for many years, almost 20 years, is a process called sales-free selling. And if the name gives it away, it's The Death of Sales and the Rise of a New Methodology. It's the title of my first book. And it really talks about how sales is dead, how convincing, pitching, and all that is really an outdated mechanism for doing business development. And so my methodologies are much softer and nurturing. And I think that really resonated with the lawyers who never wanted to feel salesy. They just wanted to grow business, just by building relationships and doing things more naturally. And so that's what I'm teaching them every day. And I think those, combination of a couple things in the air sort of made it work. And it's been like this for about 15, 16 years, really helping the legal community just get better and better at this skill that they're so lacking, from law school, through the law firm level. They don't learn any of this stuff. So
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what magic words did that coach sprinkle into your ears that unlocked this potential for you to grow your sales even more than you had already?
I think I can probably give you two. Number one was that no is the second best outcome you can ever get to. And I thought at the time that was a lunatic talking to me. What do you mean no is the second? No is the worst thing I can hear. I never want to know. I would spend days avoiding a no. He goes, no, you don't understand, Steve. You either move someone to a yes or you move them to a no quickly, but you're not going to spin your wheels with the think about it's and the maybes and I'll get back to you, because they're really just telling you no, but they just don't want to give you the bad news. And getting them to a fast no will save you a tremendous amount of time and energy and emotional energy. And I just didn't realize that. And the other thing was I just didn't do enough qualifying. I was trying to push to a close, to get the business and to get the check and put it in the bank and move on, instead of really qualifying that there's a fit. And I think those two things I've taken to the highest level of what I'm teaching my clients. But at the very basic level, I was just trying sheer force and effort to get business and not taking no for an answer and doing all the stuff that my managers told me I had to do to close business, when in reality, it never felt right. And I never really enjoyed that part of sales. So the things that I learned and the things that I've now perfected and that I'm teaching are all very, very, like, you just can't feel better about it than doing it this way than any other way that I've ever seen.
The idea that you could have a conversation with someone that is both enjoyable, but also has a mission, has a goal, which is, let me see if this Steve Fretzin is the right person for my services, and if I am the right person for what he needs. I've had these conversations often, thanks to your podcast and thanks to other people who talk about these types of things. It makes it so much easier. It's a more enjoyable conversation when you don't have that pressure of, okay, when do I make my pitch? Am I going to do it now? Or should I wait till he's done talking or she's done talking? And it really changes the way you see these conversations. And to that point, talk a little bit about what your clients get from a coach like you, because for a lot of lawyers still, they see coaching out there in sports. They maybe hear about wellness coaches or they know about fitness trainers. But what is coaching in the legal world when it comes to business development and marketing?
Well, I mean, generally coaching is an opportunity to understand where someone's gaps are and help them, level them out and get above them. And instead of telling them what to do, you try to work them through, what do you think you should do and why? And, try to get as much out of them as you can before you ultimately have to step in and try to, provide options or provide direction. So it's a little bit like counseling, like a therapist or therapy in some ways, with the goal of setting and achieving goals and objectives. But here's the thing that I learned, and it took me a long time to learn, and a lot of coaches are doing it their way. I'm going to do it my way. There's no right and wrong way. The thing that I found, though, is that I was spending a lot of my time, Wayne, doing training when I really wanted to do coaching. So what that would mean is, instead of me coaching somebody to achieve a goal or to hit their numbers or whatever, and talk through certain, specific, maybe client opportunities, I was training them on, here's how you set an agenda for a meeting. Here's how you better qualify. Here's how you network effectively. And you're not, so most coaches are trying to sprinkle in training with coaching. So I don't do that. Here's what I do. I have a very specific program with 3 pillars, and this is the only thing I provide. If somebody doesn't want this program or this isn't a good fit, again, I've got a dozen coaches I'll send them to that do straight up coaching. But what I found what's missing is this training component. So I put lawyers through a 6-month training class, essentially. Go back to school, learn all the skills that you never learned in law school, that you never learned at the law firm level, so that when you walk away, you own and internalize everything you need to be successful as a business developer for the rest of your career. That isn't necessarily happening in a coaching environment. You can get coached for a year and never really learn business development. You can just get coached and do better. That's fine. And again, for many people, that works. But I found that with the training class, with lawyers from around the country getting together and working on their businesses, role playing, practicing, rehearsing, getting this content ingrained in them, and then on top of that, offer coaching and be available as an advisor, like, ad hoc as they need. Those 3 pillars seem to be the recipe that I've found for success with my clients, because I'm not looking to just help someone for a year. I'm looking for them to get help for the rest of their career. Yet I don't want to work with them for their whole career. They don't need to work with me twice. They can work with me once, get every drop of juice out of me, and then they're off to the races and go win the game, go make your millions, provide for your family. So I've put together a program that maybe doesn't have the best, repeat business situation. Like, I don't have that model of how do I keep a client, working with me as a coaching client forever. My sister's a therapist. She has that model. I mean, no one leaves my sister. If you're talking to my sister about your problem with your teenagers, you're not going to leave her after a week or a year or two. You're going to stay there and chat her ear off forever. I don't have that model. I turn some of my clients into some pure advisory roundtables where they can collaborate with other attorneys, but at that point, they have the goods. They just need to continue the momentum, but it isn't through learning from me necessarily.
So given that model that you have for your coaching, how'd you go about marketing yourself? Because we'll talk about the ways you are marketing yourself in terms of content, but when the Great Recession hit and you started to see more demand from lawyers, you decided to niche down eventually into that area. How did you start marketing yourself? Start letting these lawyers know that you have the goods that they need to help them build their book, get their autonomy, and hopefully make life better than if they are just an income partner grinding away for 2,500 or 3,000 billable hours a year.
Yeah. I mean, social media, I've been doing that since, LinkedIn came around. I mean, going back maybe 17 years, I've been not only using LinkedIn, but also teaching it for about 17 years. So that was like a staple, no problem. And then I had this really weird conversation. I have a very wonderful client who I helped get, big 7-figure sale on his business after growing it. When working with me, he was in the data security business. He was on my podcast a while ago named Steve Hamburg. And he sat me down. He said, "Steve, you're going to write a book." And I go, "What? I don't know how to write a book." He goes, "Well, you're going to write a book, and here's what you're going to write, and here's how it's going to go." He gave me this book called The Goal? And it's a book on operations, but yet it was written as a parable. So it's a story, and, like The Go-Giver and some of these books that are really easy to read because it's you just read it as a story and you get your takeaways that way. So painstakingly, I wrote this book called Sales Free Selling as a story of a lawyer, an entrepreneur, and a salesperson meet a coach named Scott. Wink, wink, it's me. And the reason that there's a lawyer, a salesperson, and an entrepreneur is interesting because I, at that point, hadn't pushed all my chips in to legal yet. I had just dabbled in it. So I kept my kind of options open, right? Otherwise, if it was a book I'd write today, it'd be 3 lawyers walking into a bar, that kind of thing. But that was really my first opportunity to really take my writing to the next level. And it was very, very difficult. Like, I can pump out a how-to article in an hour, like one that would be really, really good. But to write a book as a story with characters having dialogue like I'd never written, that was really, really tough. But once I got that knocked out, that was a big part of kind of like what drove some of the, then you have the authority, you have the book, you have the, hey, this is my business card, here's my book, right? It was a really, really, and I had a great book launch and everything. I think, though, writing for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, I was introduced to an editor through a client of mine and a friend of mine, and so started writing for the Bulletin. Meanwhile, I'm always posting on LinkedIn. I'm using it for marketing and business development. And so just in tons and tons of presentations, Wayne, I'm networking groups. I mean, it's a combination of business development and marketing. And the way that I look at this is I'm climbing a mountain. and I'm going to climb it on two sides of the mountain at the same time. I'm going to climb the business development side, and I'm going to climb the marketing side. And if I do them both well, there's a good chance I'm going to meet at the peak with myself. And in this weird story, I make it up. But ultimately, that's where I think people need to be in order to, because you could just do business development or just do marketing, and you could have some good success doing either. But when you slap them together, you've got relationships and networking and all this great stuff that's going on, and then support it with all of the social media and podcasts, books, articles, everything that's going on over here. It's really a fantastic recipe for success. I mean, you're going to win the blue ribbon at for the chili at the state fair.
We'll have to try that chili.
It's good chili.
The great thing to me about the intersection of business development and marketing is when you can take the marketing tools, let's say articles you're writing or podcast episodes, and to be able to give a client, when you're hopefully close to closing that deal, closing that sale, to be able to isolate, here's 5 blog posts or here's 3 articles that I wrote last year that are exactly covering the problem that you're facing. That is so eye-opening for clients, whoever they might be, because instantly the fact that you covered it last year tells them that you are someone who's thinking about these issues. You may have dealt with them before, especially in the legal space. When you go as a lawyer, let's say you're a corporate lawyer, you go to a general counsel and you mention, oh yeah, we covered these 5 things last year. Yes, your marketing is meant to help generate awareness, but at the same time, in the BD side of things, it can really hammer home, look, we are the go-to insert blank here for you, because we know the stuff, we write about it, and here it is. Here's proof. We're already thinking about this stuff over again. I'm curious, of all books to write as your first book, a parable, right? That's like 10 for the Olympic judges in terms of difficulty. What was the writing process for that? Did you sit down and carve out early mornings, late nights with a big mug of coffee? Like, how did you actually write a parable?
Well, I think what I did, I started with an outline of what I wanted to lay out. So, right, like almost like the table of contents before that existed. And the nice thing is that it's a lot of, the story is my story. The story is, the plane crash I was in. The story is how I meet people typically and the process I put them through. And then they're coming to a class. Well, the class is my class. So like from one standpoint, it was easier to write because what happened today? Well, it's like almost like Seinfeld, like is a story about my day. And so I could just talk about, here's the class I taught today. Here's what we covered. And that's the story of chapter, 10 or week 10 or whatever it is. So there was some element of that, but here's the funny thing. Like I would write so poorly so I'd say like, and then Wayne said, hey, Steve, what do you think about XYZ? And then I would reply. So I had an editor, thank God. And the editor would come back to me and she'd say, look, you need to like rewrite this chapter because the way that you're laying it out, it's not going to read well. And I was like, oh my God. So I instead of saying I said, then I exclaimed, or I like had to keep using different, angles to make it work. But it wasn't like I had a set, cup of coffee, every, Sunday morning or something like that. I think it was when I had an hour or 2 gap in my day and my evening and my weekend and just making it, I think when something's important to me or when something's important to people in general, they make time for it. I work out 3 days a week doing Pilates. I play tennis 2 days a week and pickle 1 or 2 days a week. Like I'm constant because I care about not only having fun, but also like that I'm getting exercise. And so I think the writing was very much the same way. It was something that I had to get into a habit where I wanted to do it, A, and B, I enjoyed it. I enjoy the process of writing. I didn't enjoy the feedback and having to change it, but I also liked that I was learning how to write in a different way. That was interesting to me because I think I've enjoyed creative writing and I excelled at that in high school and college, but never as a parable. So that was the only part that really threw me, Wayne, was the parable part of it. Like everything else of it, like I was a lock. It wasn't an issue.
And in that time, since Sales Free Selling, you've written 3 more books. How was the process for each of those books? Were they similar to the parable? Did you feel like you were better at authoring books, whether it was compiling your articles or starting from scratch? How was that process for the other 3?
Yeah. So the second one was the Attorney's Networking Handbook. And it's a series of, long articles. If we just want to call them articles, but, so what are the toughest things that lawyers deal with or that anyone deals with networking? Well, where do I start? Where do I go? Who am I looking to meet? Why? What do I say? What do I ask? Everything that you'd want to know. It's kind of like that. That was the way I approached it. And so you look at, 15 chapters or 18 chapters of answering those questions and giving you what to do, what to say in a how-to format. I can write like that all day. Like that was very easy. That was much easier than the first. Then the third and the fourth are a bit tricky. The third was essentially a series. It was my articles for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin put into one book. And then I doubled that and then made that the fourth book. So I'm a bit of a cheater, if I'm being honest, that the third and the fourth books makes it sound like I've written four, and I have written 4 books, but ultimately, and we may want to segue to this conversation about the importance and the criticalness of repurposing content. And maybe that's a good segue. But when I put out a book that's, 51 chapters, that's a lot of chapters and that's a lot of goodies in there. But that's 51 chapters from the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin in one place. Most people nationally, right, they're not getting the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin. And even if they are, they're waiting every month for my article, probably not. So to have that all in one place, I think is really, really critical. And that was easy to write. It was, more challenging to publish and just make sure. And then I got a bestseller status in 4 countries because I was able to do it in a Kindle version and get that blown out and then bring it back to the actual book version. And there's a method to getting bestseller. Now, keep in mind, I'm not competing against, John Grisham, right? I'm competing against other, legal business development books. Well, there are none. There are very few. So, bestseller is a little bit, maybe misleading, but it is the case. I did get that status in a couple countries. But repurposing has really been one of the central elements of not only what I do to be successful in marketing, but also what I'm working on with my clients on a fairly regular basis.
Do you have help in terms of a book coach? I think there are probably people listening or watching going, how the hell did this guy do 4 books, publish them, go through the process? You mentioned an editor for the first one. What kind of assistance did you have in terms of getting this from your brain to a final product?
That wasn't really a challenge. And again, you can work through a publisher and make, 2% or 5% on your books and deal with, every experience I've had with publishers has been horrible. And I'm not going to name names, but you just don't need a publisher right now. That's just not a part necessary unless you want to, again, you're John Grisham or you're looking to, Snack or any of those guys, like they're going to go through a publisher because they're going to sell millions and millions of books. Legal business development, legal networking. That's a very specific niche within a niche within a niche. So for me to self-publish through Amazon was very, very easy to do. Find someone to do the cover. Even the cover that I have for this legal business development is in rocket science with the rocket on there. I actually did this. I doodled that, sent it to my stepbrother, who's an artist, and he knocked that out in probably an hour, and he didn't even want to take any money for it. I was like, oh my God. So I sent him a gift card. But you get the book cover, you write the book, you have someone put it into Amazon, edit it and put it into Amazon a certain way with the margins and size and font and everything. And then essentially I hired a book coach at the end to help me get that bestseller status, which I think is important because you want a book to have a good initial thrust out into the marketplace. You don't want a book that is just there to be handed out, although that's fine. That is one way to approach, writing a book. However, when you can get that book out and get that status and get testimonials and everything, 5 stars and all the things that you're looking for, it definitely makes an impact on your ability to not only sell that book, but again, continue to be seen as an authority in that subject.
Well, and just as a reminder of the wonderful world we live in, if you think Steve as a lawyer coach is in a niche, or I'm in a niche, ghostwriting thought leadership for big law partners, there are people whose sole job it is to help other people get their books approved by Amazon, get it laid out by Amazon, go through that whole process. So you can find freelancers who are very talented. Don't be misled by the word freelancer. They are very talented at knowing the Amazon system, knowing the book publishing system. So yeah, there's always help whenever you need it.
Yeah. And then I think take it, because doing it on your own can be scary. And there's a lot of really talented, also like there's a lot of, and I've interviewed a number on my podcast, Wayne, there's a lot of book creators that can help you write the book, by interviewing you, by, walking you through it in a way where it's less than you just sitting down and writing a book, which is to most attorneys a terrifying, type of thought. And it doesn't have to be that way. So there's just a lot of different ways to write it. There's a lot of ways to publish it. There's a lot of ways to promote it, and getting help, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, and there have been plenty of recent bestsellers in terms of the general book publishing. Prince Harry is one I'm thinking of, where he has a ghostwriter. People know who the ghostwriter is. There's no secret. And yet that book will still sell. Everyone's happy. They understand. If you think President Obama or President Trump or President Biden is up there reading speeches that they wrote in their entirety while they're on Air Force One, you are sorely mistaken. They have speechwriters. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin column, because you have an opportunity to write once a month for 8 years. And I'm curious, how do you find topics to cover regarding business development and marketing? You're not an employment lawyer where there's new things going on all the time in business, in the law, in industry, in the economy. Where are you getting your topics to cover over such a long period of time?
That's a great question. I've never been asked that question before, and it's a wonderful question. And I'm very proud of the way that I have come up with topics to keep the column interesting, to keep it moving. In fact, I was nominated for an Illinois Press Association award for Best Original Column. I didn't win ultimately, but I just was so honored to be nominated and to be in the company of great writers, columnists. Sometimes it's when I'm dealing with a client and the client has a problem or an issue, or we're talking about solutions, and I think, this would actually make a really good article, because the thing that this lawyer is going through, a lot of lawyers are going through, and I can write an article that will solve that. I'll give you a quick example. So I was talking about how to ask for introductions with a client. So you have clients, Wayne, I've got clients. We want to ask them to introduce us to other lawyers and other people that they know. Okay. How do you do that in a non-salesy way, a non-aggressive way, in a way that doesn't make you feel like you're trying to take from somebody? And so I was telling him, here's a number of different ways to ask the question or to bring it up in a non-salesy way. And he goes, oh, these are all great. I love these. I'm like, well, that's an article, dummy, right? I mean, that's something that I can publish that's going to give away, yes, some great language and some great ideas, but I don't care. Like I give away a lot of stuff. That's part of content creation. You're not, keeping everything for yourself. You're giving away ideas. So I did that. And that's one way that'll come up, just through my day-to-day interaction with clients and things like that. The more fun way is I'm on a boat and I'm heading out into the lake with my father-in-law and my son to go fishing. And it just hits me like a lightning bolt that the way that my father-in-law fishes is he's like a savant. He's like the best fisherman I've ever met. He's taught me everything. I've become like a great fisherman because of my father-in-law. And I said, what if I wrote an article about him and fishing and how fishing, relates to new business for lawyers? And that turned into, in fact, they have that article framed in their home, their lake house, because I mentioned him and talk about him. And it was like a big ego stroke for him. Trust me. He needed that ego stroke, a bit of a narcissist in some ways. So, and then just recently, for example, I was watching the show, The Bear, which is a Chicago-based show about a chef. And I was just noticing some things about the way that they were running their restaurant. And I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but I'm going to write an article comparing great client success, loyalty, and engagement with The Bear, and how they, what I learned from The Bear and watching how to run a great restaurant. So those are the kinds of things that I pick up from the real world, fishing and TV and other places, things I see and hear and do, that where I can provide either a great LinkedIn post or a great article. But that's where the content's coming from generally.
I have to say, those types of articles, that inspiration, there's a thin line. Some of them are done really well and they're interesting and they just are a pleasure to read. And then sometimes you have these articles like what the Philadelphia Eagles run to the Super Bowl can teach you about legal marketing. And you're like, okay, what? It's a full NFL season. There's playoff games. Like, what's the connection here? But yeah, it's funny. You can almost be too broad. So yeah, the ability, and I think that's a key component of any thought leadership program, is making it relevant, making it compelling and interesting, making it obviously educational so people feel like they got some value from it. But all too often, especially lawyers with practices where there's always things going on. Like I said, whether it's employment, real estate, if you're just regurgitating what the court is saying, then that's something that a would-be client or a current client could get from any lawyer. But the ability to actually connect dots that are not easily connected or are not transparent and you can't easily see, I think is how you bring value. So when your columns are connecting dots or making points that people go, that's a good idea, a good point, that's where I think the value is.
Well, and I would take it a step further, Wayne, real quick, is that I hate reading books and articles or anything where it's all 20,000 feet up and now you go figure it out, right? Or here's, 50 pages of research I did on this that I have to sift through to get to, I can't tell you how many books I read where the whole book is the title. Like the title is all I needed. I didn't need to read the book. So what I try to do in my writing is to give actionable takeaways and tactical things that they can do and say to get value so they can read an article and walk away and say, I can actually do that one thing today, tomorrow. And that way it's not just a theory. It's really like, oh, I have something I can do with this that's useful. And that's how I try to write because I understand like that's how I want to take away from, I read Mike Kim's book on You Are the Brand. And if nothing else, I get like, oh, here's a great way to do a LinkedIn profile. And so I changed my LinkedIn profile. Well, that was a great takeaway from that book, among others. But that's what I need. That's what I'm longing for is the ability to be shown the path versus it being kind of like, hey, it's behind the curtain somewhere. You go figure out where, what's behind the curtain.
Well, and to that point, I want to transition to your podcast because I think a lot of most of your guests on that podcast, you have the luxury of getting into the weeds with them because you've got maybe 35, 40 minutes with them. You're running your podcast twice a week. So you actually have a chance to dive deep into your topics with these guests. So talk to me a little bit about where the podcast came from. That was, as I said earlier, you just passed 300 episodes.
Yep.
You're cranking out at least 2 a week. Sometimes you're mixing in your webinars. So what was the idea for the podcast? What were you trying to do with the podcast?
Yeah, so I was on a podcast with a friend of mine in the legal space, a big firm lawyer. And when we got done with the podcast, I asked her, do you do the editing and the production? How do you do this? And she goes, oh, no. She goes, I hand it all off to a production company. They take care of everything. I just show up, I do my 30 minutes and I'm out. And I go, yes, please. Where do I sign up? I don't want to edit. I don't want to produce. I don't want to graphics. I don't want to do any of that stuff. I mean, part of the reason it looks like, Wayne, that I'm so successful at marketing is because I'm surrounding myself with marketing people in production companies and editors and people that make me look good, similar to, the editor of my first book who told me I was terrible. I had to rewrite it. So I asked her and it was turnkey productions out of LA. And I spoke with this guy and he goes, it isn't just about putting out content. It's about business development and marketing and branding. And he says, and I can work with you on all of that as well as putting out, the show and everything. And so I was like, oh yeah. And it wasn't that much money. I mean, granted, in the grand scheme of things, for some people, they'd be like, well, that's money. Well, yeah, but you have to invest in yourself and invest in what you're doing. And I wanted to do it right. I didn't want to have to figure anything out. And there's a price that goes, if you want to figure out business development on your own and take 3, 5, 10 years to do it. Yeah, there's a cost to that. And there's a cost to hiring me, right? One's going to cut through it and get you through it in a year. The other's going to take 3, 5, 10 years to do. And the billable hours you're going to lose. So you figure it out. So that was really the key and instrumental thing. If you ask me, Steve, did you start your podcast at the right time 3.5 years ago? I'd say 100% no. I should have been doing this for 10 years. I should have been doing this right at the very start because podcasting, more than books, more than articles, more than anything I've done in my career to broadcast my brand and to help lawyers and to get business and generate relationships, it's been number one by a pretty good margin.
I would argue that in the professional services world, podcasting is more important than in other aspects of industry and of life, because if I am going to write a check to Steve Fretzin and we're going to work together for a quarter, for half a year, for 12 months, whatever it is, I better like him. I better know not only that substantively he knows what he's talking about, but I better like him as a person because it's going to be miserable if we can't get along. So from my perspective, your podcast is like this audition tape that just comes on twice a week. If I want to get a feel for what it's like to work with you, then yeah, you dole out your knowledge throughout the course of every episode. But the jokes you make, the way you approach life, the way you talk about your family, that to me is like the special sauce of your podcast, because you are signaling to people, well, this is who I am. This is what I do. I fish. I do things with my son. I travel with my wife. And if you don't like it, okay. But if you do like it and you do believe that I know what I'm talking about, I'm the person to help you among a sea of other coaches who might substantively say similar things to me, but they don't have my personality, they don't have my view of the world. So I think in our field, professional services, it is immensely helpful to be able to build a relationship.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about it. I'm in someone's car with them for 45 minutes in traffic and they're just listening. And one of my clients he said he listened to me like for 8 hours straight. He's a client of mine already, but I was like, hey, I must be doing something right if he's willing to sit there and listen to me for 8 hours. I mean, that's a lot of me. But what I try to do is I try to make the majority of the podcast about people getting to know my guest, and most importantly, just similar to the writing. I mean, there's not that much difference in the way that I think of things. What can you pull out of a podcast that's going to actually help you in your growing your law practice, in being less stressed, in getting your LinkedIn down, whatever it might be? I've got 310 episodes of amazing content. And yes, they also get to know me and my personality and the authentic, me. I am who I am, and I'm not going to tell them about the big fight I had with my wife, although I might, that doesn't really happen. But, it's, I can still say my teenager son, my teenager's room is a pigsty, and I had to spray like some non, scenting spray in his room the other day, that kind of stuff, but that's life. I think people want to know that I'm a human like they are. And, I put on my, pants one leg at a time and everything else. So, and I don't think you necessarily always get that with a book. I mean, I just read Trevor Noah's book over my trip to Paris and everything. And I really feel like I know him more and better, and his childhood. And, there was definitely a connection not between our lives, but, I felt I understand him now and I understand kind of where he came from. That's not necessarily the same as like listening to him talk and be a part of my life, like he's a friend in my back seat of my car, for 10 hours or something. There's a difference there. So I think podcasting really brings that to the forefront. And that's why I just love it as a medium. It's in lawyers. I found also, by the way, like I've tried a lot of video. And as much as I think video is a great thing, I think for most lawyers, they prefer to multitask and listen while they're doing their work, billing their hours, walking their dog in the car, whatever it might be. And so it's a much more relatable medium than video, I think, in many ways, for the legal industry. Maybe for younger lawyers, maybe the video might be okay, but for the 40s and 50 somethings, I think the podcasting is just perfect.
How do you go about choosing your guests? Because you have an eclectic mix of guests. You've got people who are talking about tech, they're talking about business development, they're talking about wellness and spirituality. Are you handpicking these people? Are they reaching out to you? Do you have help? How are these people getting onto your podcast?
It's a real diverse mix, Wayne. There's a ton of podcast promoters out there now. So they're promoting a lawyer, they're promoting a legal tech company. And so they're going to reach out to all the legal shows to say, hey, I've got this talent. And so it's funny because sometimes they'll be like, and he can talk a lot about, labor and employment and how the employment is. And I go, have you listened to my show? I'm not talking about legal stuff, right? I'm talking about, growing a law practice. And they go, oh, I go, now if that person's a rainmaker, if that person runs, a firm and can talk about scaling, yeah, then they're for me. So I think it's a combination of people approaching me, meeting people through the course of just networking. And so let's say, like, for example, I do your show now. And then at the end of the show, I go, Wayne, you should really be on. And then I tell you, you should be on The Law Entrepreneur, or you should be on some of these other podcast shows where I'm friends with the person who runs it. Now I'm moving you around. Now you're getting to guest on those shows. So it's a little bit of an insider's podcast world that once you get into it and you start building relationships, it's fairly easy to not only move around, but also find guests. And in some cases, and this is crazy doing 2 shows a week, but I mean, before I left for vacation, I think I had like 14 or 16 like done episodes in the tank, like just sitting in a queue which is a lot. That's a lot of shows already done. And again, once I record them, I'm out. Like I don't have to deal with them again. They're just all going to happen through my production company. So, so I don't feel that stress of like, oh, I have to get another show out. I have to get another show out, which I know it can be challenging, but I would say it's really been much easier to get podcast guests than it used to be. And so I don't think that should be a concern for anybody. There's a lot of people that want to be on podcasts these days.
What was your reaction the first time you had a sponsor come to you and say, hey, we're willing to sponsor your podcast? Did you know it was a thing? Were you looking for that? What was your reaction?
I thought it was something I'd have to wait until I had a certain number of downloads or a certain number of episodes. And it happened fairly early on, where I was approached and, I had to like, what do I have to like write up something? Like I need a contract. I need a lawyer for a contract. No, I needed to come up like, what are they giving me? And then what am I giving them? Like, what am I doing to make sure they're getting value for being a sponsor on my show? And so I think the thing that's unique too, Wayne, is because I have a big network, that being a sponsor on my show, you're going to get the visibility, you're going to get the momentum that can have. But more than that is like, I'm going to introduce you to the relationships that I have. So the people that have been like Moneypenny is a good example, right? They do a virtual reception and stuff on my live chat on my website. They've been a sponsor now for, I don't know, maybe a year. But I'm introduced Stephanie Vaughn Jones to dozens of my best contacts, my strategic partners, other folks in legal. So it isn't just the show. She's getting kind of me as a partner, which I think lends it to more than what you might just get, just like signing a check and then getting your name mentioned on a show. So I think that's a little bit unique about me and kind of how I run things. But I was obviously thrilled, and I just picked up 2 newer sponsors. So I have 3 total sponsors, and that revenue is great, and it's also just great from a partnership standpoint. I also like when I use their stuff. Like I have Moneypenny on my site, and I have Get Visible's my other sponsor. Like they redid my website and they're doing some marketing for me now. So like I can really talk about them with a lot of passion because I'm using them or I've used them. And so that also helps.
That's better than the alternative, which is you misspelling their name. When you sometimes hear these sponsor ads where the person obviously has no clue what the service is.
Yeah.
They are just being fed the line, and hopefully they pronounce it right because they practiced, but there's no connection there.
Or the sponsor, Wayne, real quick, or the sponsor's like totally unrelated to the business, or it's like a product you don't believe in. So like, hey, here's a new, Bob's Jerkies, or the jerky sticks. Like they taste terrible, yet I'm promoting them on my show. Like that's not a great situation either.
And to your point, there comes a phase or a point where your listeners trust you, right? They come to you, whether it's maybe it's your readers as well for the book or the column, but your podcast listeners trust you. I'm going to subscribe and download because Steve is talking to people and talking about topics that are relevant to my legal practice or my wanting to build my business. And if he starts having on beef jerky entrepreneurs because he's taking on the sponsorship or his sponsors aren't focused on me, then I start to think, well, wait, is Steve really out to serve, or is he out to serve himself and just make the money himself?
Right. Right on.
So we've covered books, we've covered the articles, we've covered the podcasts. Would you say it's made a difference in your business? Because there are some people out there who will post on social media left and right, they'll write columns, and they cannot, over the past couple of years, point to a client that's come in through one way or the other. Do you think that these efforts have paid off for you in terms of either relationships, client or referral, or just general awareness? Are you happy you've gone through the process you've gone through to put out this content?
It's been life-changing. I mean, especially the podcast, when you interview 310 people, 320 people, and you actually take the time to develop a relationship, and I'm not like best friends with everyone, I can't do that, but the idea that if I needed something, or if they needed something, we can reach out. If we get together once a year, if we, make a referral for each other. This one guy, Walt Hampton, was on my show. I met him through the show, and we're like, people would think we're in some kind of like weird relationship because we talk about each other like we're in a romantic relationship, but we're not. We're just super friendly. We just love each other, and we just, it's a big love fest every time we get together. So, and it's a lot of fun. So I think there's something about content creation, podcasts, articles, books, all that stuff, social media. giving to the community. And my job is to I can only help so many lawyers a year, but I'm going to try to help and make a difference in the community, in the legal industry. And that's going to be part of my legacy. Some people want a legacy of handing a business down to a child or having their name like Coca-Cola be up or whatever it might be. I think mine is just leaving the industry better than when I found it. Number one. Number two is I'm practicing what I'm preaching. I'm not a hypocrite in any way, shape, or form. The way that I conduct myself when I meet a prospective client and walk them through a buying decision to see if it's a fit, then teach them the exact same method. They go, you did that to me. And I remember you did that and said that. And I'm teaching them that. They know that I'm not just, BS, right? That I'm not, and then the content. And I was talking to a client today who she's an amazing woman. She runs a huge IP group of one of the largest law firms in the world. And her social media is a disaster. And I was telling her about, here's what I'm doing. And I can show you how to do that for you. And her eyes lit up because she hates LinkedIn, hates it. So I was like, all right, we're going to stop hating LinkedIn. We're going to take it and we're going to break it down. I'm going to send you a video that'll show you what to do. And so I think there's just so many aspects of how content not only benefits me in my branding, my marketing, and relationships and business, but also in generally, just making sure my clients know that I'm not full of it. I'm going to do what I'm going to teach you to do, and I'm going to do it well, and you're going to do it well.
That's a great segue to my next question. As we start to wrap up here, what are you telling your clients these days about content creation? Are clients intuitively coming to you and saying, I know I should be writing more, I know I should be doing this? Or do you feel like you have to remind them, hey, look, articles, speaking engagements, videos, where are your clients on that kind of content spectrum?
It's more about what's their why. That's a very marketing thing to say, but what's their why? Why are they doing what they're doing? What have they done before? What do they enjoy or hate? Right. So if they hate LinkedIn and I can't break through that barrier or talk them around it, well, then we're not going to do LinkedIn. I think it's a mistake, but we're not going to do LinkedIn. I'm not going to break someone's legs because they're not going to do LinkedIn. But if somebody loves writing, and let's say their writing is just sitting on their blog, it's not doing anything, it's not being seen, it's like a ghost, behind a door. That's bad. So hey, can we get you published? Let's figure out where your audience is and let's go after it that way. So I think it's what's the low hanging fruit? Where's your audience? Who can buy from you? What gives you the biggest reach? And let's go after that. And worst case scenario, if there is nobody that you're just going to write for yourself, then let's repurpose that. Article can turn into a video. The article can be broken into 5 social media posts because it's an article with 5 bullet points, and each one of those can be a social media post. We can figure out how to go, but we just need to go. And so we want to plan and we want to execute. And nice thing about having a coach is that there's accountability. It's not, here's what you're going to do and good luck to you. And I hope that all works out. I mean, we're meeting every single week, every single month, talking about what happened, what didn't happen, why didn't it happen, what do we have to do to make it happen? Do you need some help? Who can we get to help you? Whatever it might be. Do we need to bring in an expert, Wayne? Do we need to bring in, someone from your team? Do you need me to review it? Do you want me to, help you post it? I mean, I don't know. We just have to get it done, and we have to start getting into better marketing habits. And once we get into better marketing habits, I'm posting once a week, then I'm posting twice a week, now 3 times a week. And that happens over a course of maybe 6 months. Now you've got the habit. Now you actually have a social media calendar. Oh, wow. Now you've actually got someone helping you to post. So it's not you're creating the content, let someone else post it for you. Now you've got a VA. All these things add up to success in time management and marketing and branding and everything that goes with it.
One last question for you. As you whip out your crystal ball, and don't worry, you can be wrong, because most people are wrong with their predictions, and yet they're asked to make predictions again, in the future. Whip out that crystal ball. What are you seeing as trends for marketing and business development within the legal field with lawyers? Obviously, I'm sure AI might make an appearance, but what are you seeing based on either the questions your clients are coming to you with or what you're seeing, just your general knowledge and research into these methods?
It's a slow-moving train. However, things like a recession, things like law firm buyouts have never been at a higher rate than now. The idea that there are non-lawyer-owned law firms coming up in certain states. There's a lot of pressure for lawyers to develop business. if you are a lawyer with no book of business and just to give you an example, I had a guy I talked to last week. He's coming to my class tomorrow to audit it. I like everyone to kind of see what I'm up to. And, he's working on the same, client for 6 years, and they just pulled it 2,500 hours a year, pulled it off away from him and said, hey, now go figure it out. Okay. So any lawyer at any time can have that rug pulled out from under their feet, and they're not going to land. They're going to land hard. It's going to be sore. So I think that business development, marketing, social media, leaning into legal tech, these are all things that are going to be so critical in the next year to 2 years. I don't know how this prediction can be wrong. I mean, I already said slow moving train. So I covered my bases way in there, right? I didn't say it's going to happen tomorrow, right? But it's happening. And the lawyers that are prepared for it and that are taking action on it, they're going to be okay. The lawyers that are hiding under their desks right now, listening to this, saying that's not for me, I don't know what's going to be of them. It's going to be a big, tricky, sticky mess.
Well, literally, Steve, this is not your father's legal industry, right? This is a very different place.
It is. It's a very different place. And, if you're a lawyer and you want to get a new job and you talk to a legal recruiter and you say, hey, I want to move laterally to another law firm, the very first question they're going to say is, great, what's your book of business? What do you mean? Well, I don't have a book of business. I've been busting my hump, working with these clients for X number of years. Sorry, I can't help you. Good luck. If you need some help getting your resume together, I'll send you over here. That's about it. So that's not a good sign. And it's been that way for 10 years. But, other than when the pandemic happened and there was a shortage of attorneys, right? People were hiring and actually overpaying people to come on board. Other than that blip, that the cases that you cannot really move laterally very easily without a book. So I think it's all coming to a head. It's just a matter of when that other shoe is going to drop, and some people are going to be ready for it and some people aren't.
On that positive, uplifting note,
There's hope.
People learn? There's hope. There's always hope.
There's hope.
Speaking of hope, where can people find you, learn about the services you provide, find your podcast, give them all the plugs you can?
Yeah. So the Be That Lawyer podcast, available on all major podcasts on your phone, on my website, fretzin.com, Fretzin. Also where I've placed a lot of my blog articles. And you're just curious about like what programs I'm running, from an MBA style training and coaching program to I'm running currently 5 peer advisory roundtables, where you're already a sophisticated rainmaker. You're already bringing in the business, but you're feeling alone and isolated and you want to be in a room with other highly successful people. I'm facilitating a bunch of those, and it's all on my website. So I would say check that out. And of course, go to Amazon and grab a copy of the book. Support my son's 529. The book proceeds go towards putting my son through Harvard. He's not getting into Harvard or Michigan, so or Wisconsin, I don't think. But I hope he doesn't hear this, because I don't want to sound like a negative dad. But he's a smart kid. Let's see. But anyway, so yeah, check that out on Amazon. And I'm really always happy to talk with attorneys that are getting more serious or getting serious about business development and marketing. And even if we don't end up working together, like I said earlier, Wayne, I will be a resource. I will put them in the right direction. I will give them free books, like whatever I have to do to help someone get where they need to go. Even if it isn't with me, I'm happy to be that guy. And I just get a lot of juice out of that, of just helping this industry that is such a noble and wonderful profession, but needs help in a certain area that, you and I both, understand pretty well.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing your insights and giving us a little behind the scenes peek of the content you create and how you go about creating the books, the articles, and the podcast. Best of luck with all of that content, and I'll be talking to you sometime soon.
Thanks, Wayne.